Hi, I'm Mark Finser. I'm chair of the board of RSF Social Finance and chair of the board of New Resource Bank. And we're here for a wonderful dialogue, which I'm very excited about. Thank you all for being here. And we have Robin Theiss here, who's a high school humanities teacher at the Waldorf School of Orange County. You're also a graduate of the Bay Area Waldorf Teacher Training. And we have Diane David here as well, who's the kindergarten teacher at the San Francisco Waldorf School. You're in your 27th year?
Yes.
That's incredible. And you have had 6 children all through Waldorf Education?
Yes.
That's amazing. Well, welcome. It's great to have you. And we have Kristine Deason. Great to have you here. And Kristine is a class teacher at the Marin Waldorf School. And you took one class through 8 grades, and now you're back and doing another first grade. That's incredible. And you're also a graduate of the Bay Area Waldorf Teacher. All 3 of you are graduates of the Bay Area Waldorf Teacher Training. That's very, very exciting. But you weren't in the same class, though, were you?
Kristine and I were in the same class.
Oh, wow. Nice. Okay. Well, now maybe I'll start with you, Robin. What really inspired you to go into Waldorf teaching?
It's a good place to start. I think that I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. I didn't know where I wanted to teach or how I wanted to do that, but I knew that I wanted to be a teacher. I had an experience when I was a teenager. I was in a public school, and I had an experience that throughout my schooling, I was always chasing something. Like I felt that I was always chasing this startled rabbit in a field and never quite able to capture that. And when I got to high school, I had this feeling of exhaustion, really. And I had high grades and high test scores, but I had a feeling of, what is this all about anyway? And I never really got that question answered. And so it was later on in my adult years that I came across something in graduate school. It was a writing from Rudolf Steiner, Philosophy of Freedom. And it was something that spoke to me and reminded me of that sort of chase I had when I was a child. And what I realized, I think, the picture that came to me later on was that I never enjoyed the sun that was shining on me in that chase. Or that I was always chasing this thing that was so elusive, and I never really experienced the light of the sun in doing that. And that reading really spoke to me in that way. And so I wanted to bring a different experience to adolescents especially.
Wow. That's amazing. Diane, how about you?
Well, I always wanted to be a teacher. When I graduated from college, I worked for a community arts organization called Performing Arts Workshop and taught in the public schools, taught movement and theater. And then when my own children, my oldest son, who's now 39, got ready to go to school, of course I began searching, and I immediately went first to what was most familiar to me, which was Catholic education. But then I had that one conversation that changes your life. And a friend of mine told me about Waldorf education. And I began to, I enrolled my son immediately. Actually, I enrolled my first 2 children in the school and became fascinated by Waldorf education. And soon, about, I guess, 6 or 7 years later, or even less, began to work in the school. At the time that I started to work, there was no teacher training, but assisting, etc. And soon, before you know it, I was a kindergarten teacher.
Beautiful. And Kristine, how about you?
Well, I have to say, like Robin and like Diane, I knew I was going to be a teacher, and I started teaching when I was 22. And like Diane, it was my own children who brought me to Waldorf Education. I spent 5 years teaching at the university level. I taught also junior high, high school foreign language. But then I went off to work for IBM for 10 years. And there I made money and helped provide for the family. And at the same time, my children were born, and I couldn't help myself. So while carrying a full-time job for IBM as a technical writer, programmer, I also began incrementally to teach again. And I was teaching part-time And ultimately what happened was my youngest child, my son, he was one of those children who jumped the fence like Huckleberry Finn. And they say, this is what civilization is, then I'm heading out for the territory ahead. And when he jumped the fence, I was his mom, so I needed to kind of go with him. He was only in the 2nd grade, and one day, driving around, I said to myself, I think there's a Waldorf school around here somewhere in Marin, and I don't know how I found it. If you've ever driven there, it's tricky to find. He was in the car with me. We ended up going on a tour. By this point, I'd pulled him out of school. We were trying to homeschool, and he was very quiet in the back of the car and said, Mom, that's the only school I'll ever go to, except for homeschool. And as soon as he was there, I realized that even though I had actually left IBM just a few years before and obtained my own credential to teach high school here in the state of California, this was the way I wanted to teach. And so as my own children entered the school, I entered the Bay Area Center for Waldorf Teacher Training and continued my education because I wanted to be that kind of a teacher and I wanted to be teaching that way. So that was my path.
I wonder if each of you could also describe your particular area of focus that you've been working on now and how that fits into the totality of Waldorf education, and feel free to ask each other questions, etc.
Well, I should probably start because I'm at the foundation, which is the first 7 years. As you know, in Waldorf education, there are these sort of 7-year blocks or milestones when you begin to really study child development, the picture of child development that Steiner gave us. So it's this first 7 years. And it, of course, it's blossomed. Yeah. It's all over the world. There are many more kindergartens than anywhere. And it's also grown strong roots. It's gotten deeper into the younger years with nursery schools and parent-toddler groups, and even classes for mothers who are expecting children. And so I strongly believe that that this work in the early years, of course, is the foundation for all that comes forth from there. Yeah. And so I believe my work is very important. It's very much a protection of childhood, a savoring of childhood, a nurturing of childhood. And of course I could go deeper and deeper into what we do in the kindergarten, but I also want to let my other colleagues speak as well. Yeah.
Well, I'll never forget my Waldorf kindergarten teacher, that's for sure. Yeah. And my eurythmy teacher in the Waldorf kindergarten as well. She was amazing.
I was once very quickly, I was once hosting an open house at our school in San Francisco, and this young man walks in and he says, "Can I just walk in and look at your kindergarten?" And I said, "Sure." In fact, I think it was for the teacher training that I was hosting the open house, and I said, "Are you interested in being a Waldorf teacher?" And he says, "I'm thinking about it." He said, I never went to a Waldorf school. I only went to a Waldorf kindergarten, and I will never forget it. It was so profound for me. And he walked around the room very slowly and looked at everything, and then he left. And I never saw him again, but I remember that something about that kindergarten year.
He may be teaching somewhere. You never
hopefully.
Well, I'll follow, because then I take the students from Diane's kindergarten. And as a class teacher, I start with them in first grade and I follow them. And with my last class, I followed them all the way through 8th grade. And then they were able to graduate and go to high school, or ideally Robin would teach them. And for me, initially I thought I would teach high school because I love working with adolescents. But the more, over the 3 years in the teacher training, I realized that the work of taking that 6-year-old child and not just teaching them, but moving with them, changing each year, because the teacher is moving with the class, but the teacher is also changing. The teacher has to be a different teacher, even from 1st to 2nd, and then imagine from 1st to 8th. was something profoundly interesting to me, and to just be with a group of students and witness and support that stage of that human development was something that I needed to do for myself and was very eager to do. So it's, I think, except for maybe the first 3 years of life, and I don't know what you think about that, Diane, those years from 6 to 14 are the years of the greatest monumental change in a human being. And they're wonderful to be a part of.
It's an amazing journey through the grades,
having
accompanied 6 of my children through it. And the curriculum, the Waldorf curriculum, is so rich. It is a gift to be able to go through it.
And then for you?
It's so amazing just to listen to Diane and Kristine, because the strange thing is we teach at 3 different schools, but you can speak as if you're handing them off to each other. So there's this, in the Waldorf world, there's this amazing colleagueship that you really, I don't think you experience that in any other setting. You have the colleagueship within your school, then you have it even within the state of California, within the nation, within the world. You feel very connected when you attend these conferences on a nationwide scale, and then even on an international scale. You feel very connected with your colleagues. In the high school, of course, it looks more like a traditional high school. You don't have one class teacher, so this is the opportunity now for the students to experience specialists in their field. And I happen to have a focus in humanities, so I teach mostly the literature and the history curriculum at my school, and then I share the responsibility with my colleagues who teach the science and the math and the art and the movement curriculum. So it's a little bit different in the high school, where the students are exposed to a wider variety of personalities and specialists in their subjects. We begin the day, of course, with the main lesson, which continues from the grade school. And then throughout the rest of the day, the students go through more of a traditional high school course, where they have math 4 times a week and English 4 times a week in a foreign language, eurythmy, art, and all of the different subjects. I also want to take this opportunity, since we're sort of building, to talk a little bit about what sort of current scientific research about adolescent brain development and even human brain development is saying. Because it's really interesting. It's just recently that researchers have come out saying, the brain isn't finished developing until somewhere around age 25. And we used to take for granted that the brain was sort of finished around age 3. And now what they're finding is actually that's not true at all, and especially in terms of our frontal cortex, which is the executive function of our brain. They're finding that doesn't find its maturation until somewhere around 25. And the other exciting part of the research that's coming out is that the brain actually works in this triune way. So you have your brain stem, which is really what is developed in early childhood, somewhere between birth and age 6 to 8, somewhere, which is really Diane's realm. And this brainstem development is really responsible for our fight or flight instincts. So it's really important that the child experience a safe, harmonious, good, wholesome atmosphere, and not exposed to a lot of stress and pressures from the environment unnecessarily. Then the second part of the brain that's developed is sort of the limbic system. And what research is saying is that part of the brain develops when a child is able to have meaning imparted through their learning. So that as they learn, they actually are connected to the world in a meaningful way, that they find a relationship with the world that is imbued with a sense of purpose. And that is really then what you just described, this wonderful transformative years between ages 6, 7 to age 14. And then the last part of the brain that develops after age 14 is really this prefrontal cortex, which is our ability to have a second thought before we actually act on our impulses and desires. And for many years, teenagers sort of got a bad rap for always acting impulsively, but now we find out that that's okay. That's part of how they are developing their brains, and how they're going to become thoughtful adults later on, is being able to have time and not be rushed into really making decisions that are beyond their capacities too early. And what I think is really fascinating about this brain research is what they're finding in terms of adolescent brain development is your prefrontal cortex is dependent on how well you developed your limbic system of the brain. And your limbic system is dependent on how well you developed the sort of STEM part of the brain. And so it's sort of this building that happens. And so the Waldorf curriculum really does address this modern research. And even though you know, Rudolf Steiner said this 100 years ago, it's nice to see that we have current research that's really confirming that in a very meaningful way.
And of course, Robin, you completely painted this beautiful picture of thinking, feeling, and willing, which are the soul forces we work with as teachers when we work with our children. It's right there.
Yeah.
The artistry of working with this kind of a curriculum is that you have this profound understanding of how the human being develops. You have tremendous freedom, but you also have a feeling for the nuance, not only of the changes that are occurring in the children from one year to the next, and I'm speaking, of course, as a grades teacher, but even in the high school, you would agree that there's a huge difference between a 9th grader and a 10th grader.
Two different human beings.
Thank goodness, right?
Yes, thank goodness.
You know? And so we're able to work not only with the nuances of these ages that could be very close together, we might want to lump them, and then we also work with each individual. And that's what makes it so profoundly interesting, and it's also what requires that as teachers we work, I would call it in an artistic way. Very often when people hear about Waldorf education, oh yes, you do all the arts in Waldorf schools, and we do. But I would go even further to say that crafting your day's work, your week's work, your attention in a moment is an artistic process, because it requires that you be attentive to these children who are before you, the individuals, what they represent as that stage in development, where you are taking them. We don't teach a child without envisioning where they are going, not just the next year, but even into adulthood. And I think that's a profoundly interesting and a really important task, one that helps me wake up every morning, you know, certainly with a strong sense of purpose and engagement.
And civilization keeps changing too, right? So you took a class for 8 years and now you're back in 1st grade.
I did.
Probably, I'm assuming that this 1st grade is very different than the last
hugely
1st grade.
Different.
We were talking about that,
and you hear this all the time, and of course the kindergarten teachers are seeing this too, and the early childhood teachers, they're seeing different children coming in, you know, from the very beginning. And 9 years is it's a long time, but 9 years ago, my students' parents didn't have smartphones, for example. They do today. And I don't want to attribute, it's not a one-to-one correspondence, but there are many factors that make them different, and then I find myself unable to repeat things exactly as I did, because now I have to meet these children. And again, it's profoundly interesting, you know, and humbling. There is nothing that pushes you up against yourself more than working with children, which is why, and that, you know, I know that when I went into the teacher training to become a Waldorf teacher, when I was first met with all of this work on myself, I went, wait a minute, I give me the tips. I want I'm an adult.
You wanted a methodology.
I did. Well, I didn't want the methodology, but and yet, when you're in front of the classroom, they are seeing you truly for who you are, and you have to meet them for who they are. So you really have to be working with yourself profoundly. And I know that's true, no matter the age of the child or the student.
Yeah, it's interesting because people often ask me about the teacher training, because you would think that for a high school humanities teacher that the Waldorf teacher training must have involved a lot of study of history and literature, and actually it didn't involve that much study of history and literature. I had to do that in the regular schooling through graduate school. And what I rely on most every day teaching is the art that I did in the Waldorf teacher training program. Because I think it's, you know, Rudolf Steiner said that education is really an art and that the teacher is an artist. And I really experience that every day because you have in front of you possibility, just possibility, not formulas, not fixed notions of who these children should become and who they shouldn't become, but you have in front of you just possibility. And until you've experienced the world as an artist, what do you do with possibility? Except that you just receive it for what it is. And then you are humbled and at the same time completely inspired by the children in front of you. But if I had just learned about history and literature, then I would, you know, walk into the class and I would have all this information to give over to the students. And, you know, to be quite honest, you talked about the changes in the world with technology. If we're just disseminating information and education, then we're in the wrong business because the internet's doing a better job of it than we ever could. So if it's just about information, then it's a waste of time to have them in school all day. We actually have to be providing something that's different. And the only way I can do that is through my experience in the teacher training and really becoming an artist, even though I'm not an art teacher.
That's beautiful.
It's so amazing, this quality or this thought of the art of teaching. And you, as both my colleagues said, you experience it every day. I mean, just an example is last Monday, my children came in and they were wild, which they often are on Mondays. Little ones, you know, they just take in everything from their environment. And I couldn't do the circle I had planned, or at least I couldn't start out doing the circle I had planned. I had to find a way to get their attention and to bring them together as a whole. So I had to, you know, use my teacher instincts or teacher intuition, I call it, and find a way to craft something different that met them and to bring them into a calmer space so that we could do our circle and they could play and all of that.
I think the artistic work we did in the training made us, required that we be flexible. And you have to be flexible to be able to do what you just described. And how many of us have come in with a beautifully crafted lesson? Boy, I've got this one down. And you walk in and you don't do a single thing because you know in the moment something else is needed. And it's the right thing. And without that flexibility and self-knowledge, it's impossible to meet the moment and what it's asking of you. And that's what children are.
And I think, you know, working with adolescents, it's so important for them to have that as an example of a human being, one who is flexible and able to not become identified with the emotions or the feelings of the moment, but to be able to sort of change them like garments. And those are just feelings. They're not who I am. And for the adolescent to really have an experience of that it's a pretty powerful feeling. I'm teaching right now. I have the 12th grade for the transcendental block, and we just finished reading Emerson's Nature, and then we read The American Scholar. And they are doing this exercise every morning where our school's on this beautiful bluff that sort of overlooks the Pacific Ocean. And they go out every morning on the bluff and they're observing an object in nature, and then they come back into the classroom and they try to recreate it through memory, try to recreate the sketch through memory, and learn a little bit about, you know, how our memory works and how we put in detail when there isn't detail, or we have a propensity to see the larger picture and not the details, or just the details and not the larger picture. So it's a great exercise. But they're also journaling with it. And one of the students just recently said in his journal, I thought that the plant that he's observing, he said, I thought that the plant belonged to me until the light shone on it. And then I realized it belonged to the world. And I thought, that's a Waldorf student. It's this, they've had this experience, not just from me as a teacher, but from their kindergarten teacher, from their class teacher, from all of their high school teachers, that there's something to life that's more than what we're going to read in a book. That there's something to life that where we have to give up in order to really receive. And it's really such a great picture of a Waldorf 12th grader, that they realize that this belongs to the world because the light's shining on it.
Okay. And if I could add, I think the capacity you're describing is also built on the fact that from the beginning, they have always been deeply engaged in observing the world.
That's true.
So then to reach that final thought doesn't just come out of an abstraction, it comes out of a real connected sense of, a capacity to observe the world in all of its details.
I have a friend who has a company, and all he does is really focus on real observation, and he sells that as research to these companies, to Fortune 500 companies, and he's amazed at how little real observation there is in the world.
Right.
There's a lot of opinion, but very little fact, and really observing what is the fact and what is there. And I mean, it sounds like what you're describing is really giving those tools to really be able to observe probably right from kindergarten,
Yes.
right?
With that sense of wonder, that's what I was going to say. It comes out of that sense of wonder that draws them in, that then metamorphoses to that observation.
Yeah, just last week I was at a retreat with one of my clients, and it's an investment client, and they said the same thing. They said, we need to bring a sense of wonder back into the investment world.
Yeah.
So Waldorf Education feels to me as if it's really not only at the beginning, but the research, the brain research, everything that you all three are describing is really contributing towards the kind of world that that will lead to real deepening and progress for humanity, as opposed to living in opinion. Or if one really knows how to observe, I mean, that alone is huge.
Well, as a grades teacher, when you finally begin to teach physics to your 6th grade class, chemistry to your 7th, 8th grade classes, and there's a wonderful, the approach in Waldorf Education is that you never define something to a student. You present them with the phenomena. And it's very carefully presented so that there is that capacity in the 12, 13, 14-year-old who might not want to pay attention. There is suddenly I should say, the opportunity to be, to experience wonder again. I mean, to craft the experience of physical phenomena in such a way that the 7th grade class has a moment where they gasp when they see something occur, and then they're left to ponder it, to reflect on it, to rebuild it in detail the next day, and only much later through conversation do we lead them to what we might call a conclusion. That's the opposite of what most of us experienced, I think, except for you, Mark, because you went to a Waldorf school where something was defined for us, and then
And you had to prove it.
And we were able to prove it, but something is already a little bit removed from us, dead for us. Whereas in this other approach, we get to be. Each student gets to.
It actually seems very scientific, doesn't it?
You get to be a Galileo, seeing those moons of Jupiter, orbiting around the planet, and thinking, "Holy smokes, we got to think about this differently."
Yeah.
And this is what the college professors are also saying about Waldorf graduates. There's this wonderful study done recently about Waldorf graduates, and I think for me, one of the most shocking statistics is that the national average right now of students who start a 4-year university and then complete it is somewhere in the low 40s. So we're having this sort of race to get into college. Everybody wants to get into college, but no one's ever tracking what happens once they get there. It just sort of drops off. We have all these statistics about how many people got into Harvard and how many people got into Stanford, but then no one's tracking to see how many of them actually fulfill their education. And Waldorf graduates have an 88% success rate of once they start a 4-year university to end a 4-year university. And I think that speaks volumes of exactly this. They have this natural wonder that was instilled in early childhood and all the way through the grades and even through high school, a curiosity about life, a curiosity about learning, not about getting information or having things defined for them, but about asking questions and never stopping to ask those questions, just continuing to be a researcher themselves. That's really what was instilled in them from a very young age.
Yeah, Diane, how does that happen in the Waldorf kindergarten? Maybe you can describe a little bit how that happens as far as the recognition of and unfolding of wonder, which already is there, but that it's not squelched.
Yes.
In any way.
Well, certainly through not pointing things out to them, making everything a lesson, that we go out into nature and we experience nature, and sometimes I'll have them lay down on their backs and look up at the sky, and I don't say anything, I just let it come from them. And certainly by the stories we tell. We tell lots of nature stories in the kindergarten, but we also tell fairy tales. And they live very deeply into these stories with these strong archetypal pictures. And so they have a movement within themselves. They start making these inner pictures. And these are tools for them later. They can bring these archetypal stories back, especially into high school, I think.
Even when you're a parent.
Even when
you're a parent, it really helps when you've had that.
It's true. It's true. And the brain research that I was alluding to earlier, that's exactly what it says, that this brain stem that needs to be developed first is mostly developed through unstructured play, undefined play, where you just allow the child to discover the world, not point things out, not make everything into a lesson, but unstructured play, undefined ways of discovering the world. That's really what is the basis.
That aren't filled up.
Yes, right.
Because that's what we want to do
nowadays.
Fill up our time.
Yes, certainly, as you talk about play is the child's work. It is what their task is at this age. It's amazing to watch a child play. They just, whatever is there, they make a world out of it.
It's true.
And then that quiet. We've been working in our kindergartens in San Francisco of really working to have moments of quiet in the kindergarten, because children rarely, especially urban children, rarely hear silence. And so we structure little moments before and after stories and within the circle where I just sit there for a few minutes. A few seconds, but it feels like a few minutes. I mean, much of the research tells us about the importance of play, but somehow it's not translating into the educational world anymore. There's still this push to get those letters and numbers learned right away, and not let the child be what they're supposed to be.
Well, without the understanding, a really profound understanding for how the human being develops, we panic when we don't see certain things show up. But, you know, I think back to my previous class, and I think back to students who were quicker with many things and slower with something like reading. And I had parents occasionally asking a question about this student or that student. Well, so-and-so, how's the reading going? 3rd grade. And I would say, he's progressing. She's coming along. By the time we were in 8th grade, we were reading Steinbeck, we were reading Hemingway, we were reading Mary Shelley, you know, and all of them were reading this. So to know that this is where we're going to go, and that these students will get there, and to understand what needs to be in place at each age and what can take time it is not necessarily of our culture and our time right now, because it suddenly seems like everything is needed right now. We're in an age of technology. They need to learn how to use the computers right now. Well, now, I didn't learn how to use a computer until I was working on my 2nd master's degree, and I do just fine with the smartphone and the computer. So clearly, it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have to happen at these early ages when other capacities are not developed, because this wonderful instrument is there and detracts their work.
I loved it with my children, where the teacher suggested that before they got on the computer, that my children actually build a computer first. And so they did. You know, I had to find somebody else to do it with my children. So that they realized there wasn't a deep mystery to it. It actually was a way of assembling and putting things together that ultimately could make sense. So,
in the 3rd grade, there's a wonderful curriculum that's very practical. Not that we don't do practical things all the way through, as you know, but there's a sense that the third grade child, by the time they're finished, should feel like, I could grow my own food, I can cook for myself, I could build my own shelter, I could weave something out of wool that I've shorn from a sheep so I could clothe myself. And then eventually then there's a deeper appreciation for those things which are ready-made and provided for us, but also a growing sense of confidence in who I am and what I can do as a human being.
Yeah.
So.
And everybody today that I talk to is wanting a sense of place and a sense of connection to their community, and those kinds of skills make one feel that one is engaged in one's local community. That's really special.
Connected.
Yeah.
And I think the high school students really feel connected because of the social media that's available to them. I think it was said about there's a changing of generations right now within the high school. Somewhere around, I think, 10th or 11th grade, they're seeing the new generation shift. And the prior generation, the millennial children, as they're referred to, the phrase is they were born with the world at their fingertips, because that was really the age of the internet. And now they're saying about this new generation that these children were born with the world in their pocket. And it's such an interesting idea to think, because what does that mean? What capacities does a human being really need to have to deal with the world being in his or her pocket? What do we need to prepare these children for in the future? And I think if we're still teaching them, the basics of keyboarding, we've missed the boat. We actually have to be preparing them for a future that we just don't know. And how do you prepare somebody for something that is unknown? And that's really the work of a Waldorf teacher, is we are teaching prophetically. We are teaching to the future of this individual. But at the same time, Steiner said over and over again, it has to be practical. It can't just be theory. It actually has to have some sort of practical application, or it doesn't do anybody any good.
So it's very ideal.
It is ideal.
But it's real.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Well, with the three of you, each of you have such reputation as masters, really, in your space. It's such a joy to have your experience expressed today, and also to know that you exist and that you're here in the world and doing what you do, and how that rays out in such profound ways. And the Waldorf, when I think of all the Waldorf teachers all around the world that are working similarly, as you described earlier, it's really very profound, isn't it?
Yes.
Several years ago, I attended a worldwide Waldorf teacher conference, and you hear 60 countries, but when you see your colleagues standing up from countries like Kazakhstan, and you have conversations with high school teachers from Kenya, and there's something very moving, and you feel your work is always meaningful, but to feel so connected, to know that people everywhere are looking for this education, for this opportunity to be full human beings, to grow as full human beings, and that there are teachers doing the work is it's really significant. And it makes my work more significant.
And it really requires more and more partnership with parents nowadays too, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you often hear that parent come and say, "Oh, I wish I had Waldorf education."
Yes.
I mean, I did the same thing. So what do? You become a teacher.
Wow, so inspiring. Just each of you give me such hope. With what you do and what you do day in and day out. And thank you for all that you do for protecting childhood, really, in that sense.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
And thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
This was great.
Yeah, it was. It was great fun.